Welcome, everybody, to Service and Sacrifice this week. I'm your host, Ryan Peterson, here on WTEN Plus. With me, as always, Don Dominguez, Emil Baker. Gentlemen, hello, good morning. How are we? It's hot, it's humid, and dealing with that darn wildfire smoke again.
Yeah, how about that?
Blech.
It's a repetitive cycle every year, but I think it's 16 weeks to the potential date of the first snowfall, so let's enjoy it.
On the bright side of that smoke, were you guys able to catch the sun?
Oh,
I got
You
a
can actually
picture.
see it.
Yeah, I
It
got
looked
a
really
picture.
neat.
Yeah.
But
it's incredible. It's almost apocalyptic looking,
Yeah.
too, with the
Yeah.
hazy orange glow outside.
other than that, then
But no snow. Yeah.
No snow. Hey, we're going to keep this a little bit quicker off the top here because we have a wonderful special guest joining us this week. And he's a talker, but he tells great stories. Dr. Gus Kappler, Vietnam War trauma surgeon. And Dom, you brought Dr. Kappler to my attention, and what a wonderful time we had. I have already spoken to him. A little trick of the trade here. We record this afterwards, but a wonderful conversation coming up, and he's just an incredible man.
yeah, he really is. And how many times do you get to talk to a surgeon that not only, had to work on, U.S. troops, but the Vietnamese troops, the Viet Cong as they called them back then. So it's going to be interesting to hear, his perspective of the war and his experiences. And one of the cool things is Gus is an author, and he's written 2 books, and one of them is specifically on letters to his wife, letters to Helene, or his sister or wife, I forget who it was. But, it's interesting to read these letters of service members who are going through their hell, during their time of service, and reading it in a book now, and knowing, how Dr. Kappler is now. It's incredible. It's going to be really interesting to hear those thoughts.
Yeah, and Emil, you said you actually heard say a couple things you had never heard before as a fellow Vietnam veteran.
I did, and talk about the letters and the history and the understanding. He's got such great recall. So many things that happened to us we don't remember. I don't remember. And trauma was there, PTSD, when you're in combat, when you're doing different things. But to think about the support and the people saving our lives, went through a lot of trauma, went through a lot of different things that were
For sure.
traumatic.
And you talk about recall. Dr. Kappler is, I believe 86 years old now. And his recall is spectacular. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be chatting with Dr. Kappler here on Service and Sacrifice. Welcome back to Service and Sacrifice, everybody. Thanks so much for sticking with us here on WTEN Plus. Joining us now, our very special guest this week. Now, I'm going to introduce him very formally now, but he's already told me not to call him this the whole time. Dr. Gustav Kappler, who was an Army trauma surgeon in Vietnam. Dr. Kappler, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Great to see you. It'll be Gus from here on out.
All right. Gus is better. Yeah.
Gus, let's talk first. Just talk to me a little bit about your story. Where are you from? How you got into med school, and what brought you to the Army?
I was drafted, like everyone else back then. No, I grew up on Long Island. I enjoyed hunting these huge frogs with a bow and arrow, and I would dissect them, okay? And then I'd cut the legs off and sell them to restaurants. And I enjoyed chemistry, so I went to see my guidance counselor after my sophomore year, and he said, what are you going to do? I said, I want to be a blood chemist. And he leaned back, he says, well, why don't you be a doctor? I said, good idea. So that's how it started. And I always liked using my hands, so I always wanted to be a surgeon. I went to Cornell undergrad. I went to Cornell Medical School. I went to the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond to do my residency program because I was told by previous students who went down there that you operated the first day, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want to take notes for two years at a White Tower. So I went down there, and I did operate the first day. I did burr holes on this fellow in the emergency room with a drill. I was a neurosurgical I was an intern, the neurosurgical expert for Richmond, and I didn't know a damn thing, but I could drill a hole, and I did that. So I did my surgery training. Back then, we were trained in everything. We were trained in essence, we ran the hospital. Mm-hmm. So we were trained in general, thoracic, and vascular surgery. So I could do the whole spectrum, which was great preparation for Vietnam. As an aside, when I was there, the definition of death was redefined.
Really?
It was. If you read, I forget it.
That's okay.
Whatever. I'll think of it. In a transplant program, if the organs weren't viable, they were not useful to transplant. So instead of defining death as a heart stopping, we defined death as brain death. Mm-hmm. We were the first ones to use the term brain death. Therefore, the heart kept on beating, and the organs were perfused. There was a lot of controversy over it and went to court, but it stuck. So that's that. That's why we have brain dead now. Okay, so I was drafted as an intern and as a first lieutenant. Didn't have to do anything. And then when I almost finished my training, I knew I was going to go to Vietnam. I figured I was commissioned in 1965. By 1970, when everything was over with, Vietnam be over with, all right? But it wasn't. So I married Robin, who she and I started dating in high school. We had she's my support. She's my pillar. We had 2 children, and within 2 months of finishing my training, I was in Vietnam. And that was it. At that time, you sort of you were not a real surgeon unless you had some Vietnam experience, supposedly. So I sort of wanted to go in a way, but that changed awfully quickly. And a point I bring out in my second book is that I'd been cloistered for all these educational years. I knew nothing about the outside world. I didn't read the news. I was naive, and I landed in Vietnam and had a rude awakening.
That brings me right to my next question. What kind of a shock or cultural shock was it for you once you were in country and saw everything firsthand?
Well, the first thing I had to do was begin dealing with leaving my wife and my kids. My son was just 6 months old. And I started compartmentalizing. And to make it easy to pronounce, I say bury my traumatic thoughts deep in my brain. So I was doing that on a plane. It was a non-frills plane. We stopped in Okinawa. The first time I saw everybody walking around with automatic weapons. Mm-hmm. Then I landed in Tan Son Nhut Airport in Saigon. And all of a sudden, the oppressive heat, the smells, these young men running all around in their fatigues. And they sent me to a place called Long Binh, which is near Saigon. That was the 391st Replacement Center. They gave me my fatigues and what have you, okay? And I was still, if you read those letters that I sent home, when I was there, it was like being on vacation in Hawaii. You know, I had a great oak club. I was drinking, meeting people, all right? And the night before I left Long Binh, there was a small arms fire around where we were. And I was billeting with a major that had been there a year, all right? So I stood up to see what was going on, and he was on the floor. That was my first lesson, that there were people here that wanted to kill me.
Stay down, right? All right. Well, I'm going to have you hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to get much more with Gus, Dr. Kappler, when we come back here on WTEN Plus, here on Service and Sacrifice. We'll see you in a minute. We welcome you back to Service and Sacrifice this week here on WTN Plus. More now with Dr. Kappler. Gus, as he has instructed me to call him. So before we went to break, we were talking about you had just landed in Vietnam. You're getting to know folks there. You're drinking. Some small arms fire broke out where you were, and you stood up.
Yeah,
And
like
that
an
was
idiot.
that was the wrong thing to do. Yeah.
Okay, so then I hitchhiked on C-130s up country, close to the DMZ, to a place called Phu-Bai. Now, at the replacement center, I would mention I was going to Phu-Bai, and they'd laugh, and they'd say Phu-Bai's all right. Now, on the way up country, I would stay in different hospitals that were all Quonset huts and air conditioning, and I said, wow, this is not going to be bad, you know? And I got to Phu-Bai, and they were plywood shacks with corrugated metal roofs on stilts so they wouldn't flood during the monsoon. So they dropped me off at the airport, and there was a big sign saying, Phu-Bai is all right. So I got in a Jeep, they picked me up, brought me to this place, dropped me off, and the first thing again, it was hot and sticky and sweaty, and then there was an odor of rotting food, and there was another odor in the air. What the hell is this? And I asked someone, they said, well, they burn the excrement from the latrines every morning.
Still do that.
The poor private has to do that. And that's what you smell. So I'm dragging my stuff across this dusty plain towards the orderly room, and I look up, and there is Roger King. Roger King is someone I trained with at the Medical College of Virginia. He was a year ahead of me. And I essentially had tears in my eyes. And he said, Gus, I'll help you out. I'll take care of you. It'll be all right. And it worked out to be all right. As it turned out, he and I we would operate together, and those around us would it sounds like I'm bragging, but they would marvel at how well we worked together, and how efficient we were, because we had spent time together, and we became the go-to guys at the hospital. Now, they gave me a chance to acclimate, like one night, and the next morning I was in the operating room, and this patient had walked, young man, 18, 19, was walking through the jungle and came across a Viet Cong camp that had been just emptied and left there. And he was walking through, and he saw a piece of styrofoam on the ground. Okay, now the Viet Cong and the VA had been fighting Westerners for years, and they knew the Western mentality. Kid bent over and picked up the styrofoam, as every kid would do, and it blew him up. He came to the hospital blown in pieces, multiple wounds, and we're in the operating room, and they did your best to take care of him. I fixed a lot of different things, operated on him two times, developed a rapport with him, loved him as a kid, and his kidneys failed. So I escorted him down to Saigon, where they had the only renal dialysis. And so I figured, well, I'm going to take him in, tell the doctors and nurses about him. And so I get to the door, and they said, goodbye. I said, well, don't you want any history? No, all right, we'll take care of him. And all of a sudden, I had to cut off that relationship. So I had to bury something else, you know.
Yeah. So
and my year in Vietnam, I was burying a lot of things,
right.
And that's why.
So you were there just the year.
I was there just a year, exactly.
You saw so much.
I
Gus.
saw the brutality. I saw 18, 19, 20 years old blown to pieces. I saw blood all over the roof, the floor. Now let me just make a point.
Yeah.
The Women, the book by Kristen Hanna. That book describes my year in Vietnam better than anything I could write or I've seen written. And it also describes how someone descends into post-traumatic stress disorder. Because Frankie, the main character, and her descriptions are perfect. But it was horrible. And what we would do, we would take care of a patient. Maybe they'd die on the table, blood all over the place. The next one would come in. But you had to be mentally fit to take care of that patient.
Right.
So you buried this.
Well, and that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about here. You know, you were on the older end of the spectrum getting there because you had gone through medical school and everything
Yeah, I
else.
was
So
30 years
you
old.
were 30
Yeah.
years old. You're dealing with teenagers. And we often talk about on this program about mental health and the effects and PTSD, not just for our soldiers who are out on the front lines, but for the doctors and the surgeons and how difficult it must have been for you
It's
as well. And you
dawn,
talk
and
about
Alpha
burying
219 is
these things.
commuting to
So what did
war.
that do to
21
you?
GIs
How did
bound
you
for a jungle
help
clearing
yourself
a mile
overcome it
from
once
the
you came home?
Cambodian border.
Okay, just let me back up one
American
more.
soldiers hiking their way through the sweaty jungles
American
of South Vietnam,
citizens
searching for an
assume
elusive enemy.
Post-traumatic stress disorder only occurs in those who carry a rifle and fight. That is not true.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, those not deployed to a combat zone have a higher suicide rate than those who are actually deployed. So there's a common denominator. The common denominator is stigmatization.
Yeah.
You know how you went in, they stripped you of who you were stigmatized until you became a killer, and then there was stigmatization throughout your career. If you didn't live up to the military demand, you weren't a good soldier, all right? So I just want to make that point. And yes, I thank you for saying that. We were traumatized. In fact, in the second book, Letters from Helene from Vietnam, I quote one of our medics who spent a year in a jungle fighting the Vietnamese, combat. He spent a year with us. He said the year with us was 100 times more traumatic than fighting the enemy. Okay? Seeing the death and destruction in ED, seeing what had to be done in the operating room to try to salvage someone, seeing someone in the ICU.
And how did you cope with it when you came back home?
I'll get there.
Yeah.
It was, well, I descended in those letters my sister sent me. I read them, and I read how I descent into post-traumatic stress. I buried everything. If I didn't bury this, I couldn't function the next day or the next evening or on the next case. All right? So we buried things, but then we partied. Actually, we were self-medicating. You know, we were self-medicating with alcohol and weed, all right? And the process went back and forth, back and forth. And each time you were traumatized, you went further and further down the rabbit hole. And by the time I got home, which I didn't realize until I read the letters my sister sent me, that I was in really deep. I was really suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So much so that when I got to Fort Carson, so much so that before I left, I gave a goodbye party for my roommate. I spent all afternoon eating fruit soaked in absolute alcohol. We got a fuel bladder that we turned into a above-ground pool and put it next to a bunker, okay? And I was cooking the egg rolls, all right? And I kept on drinking. I used to lifeguard, and I said, okay, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. No one should be jumping in that pool. So I got on a pool. I went to jump in. And this is to show how my executive function, my preform forecast was really, really screwed up. I jumped in, missed, hit the edge of the thing, and had developed a fractured dislocation of my elbow. And I couldn't move my fingers. I said, you idiot. But that's a symptom of what I was going through. So my wife receives a letter, the telegram, that your husband disconnected his arm at the officers' club swimming pool. And my father said to her, there's no officers' club swimming pool, and he was just screwing around. So anyway, so I got home. I wound up at Valley Forge, and Robin met me. And I wound up home. I had about a 30-day leave, okay? Then I wound up at Fort Carson, my second. Okay. So I got to Fort Carson, and we had a party. And the saving grace was that just about every doctor had been in Vietnam recently, okay? So we had a party for the doctors and their wives, and they all went home, and my wife couldn't find me, but she heard my voice. She finally found me in the backyard. I climbed a tree, and I was yelling to the neighborhood, kill all the effing Vietnamese. That's how bad I was. That's how bad I was. So Robin and I sat down and had a talk and what have you. But the bottom line is being in a group of men, just then it was men, who went through the same experience and not having to be, and not being stigmatized if you brought up the fact that you were having nightmares or you're fighting with your wife or you're having trouble with your kids. All of a sudden you mention that and someone else in the group says, that's happening to me too. And all of a sudden the whole group is talking about the same thing. And it's been documented, and that I know that the group, people are going to get in a group and opening up cures, it heals. And that's what I talk about in my book. So between my wife threatening me and the group there, and knowing that I was going to go in private practice in about 8 months, I knew I had to straighten out, and I did. I didn't get rid of all of the post-traumatic stress disorder, but I was very, very functional.
And you've documented it. I've got your 2 books here. Where
Thank
can
you.
people find these books?
Amazon.
Gus. Wonderful. The letters here, you said these were the letters to your sister when you realized how bad things had gotten for you?
I sent them to her. She found them because she was downsizing.
Right.
And she said, you cursed a lot and swore a lot. And I said, well,
Yeah.
I had reason to.
Well, we encourage people to go and seek these out, and we're going to have to wrap our session here. It was wonderful to speak with you. I'm going to hold the invitation open for you to come back anytime you're available. I'd love to have a little bit more discussion with you, Dr. Kappler, but thanks so much for joining us here on Service and Sacrifice. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we're back real quick after this quick break. Welcome back to Service and Sacrifice as we wrap up this week's episode after having that wonderful, kind of a little bit of an extended conversation with Dr. Kappler, but listening to his experience, talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, the stigmatization that unfortunately still surrounds it, but talking about how help is available.
Yeah, it's out there, and it's one of the big things that I took out of it is he mentions he didn't have a gun in his hand, he didn't have a rifle in his hands, and PTSD isn't just only for those that have rifles and are going outside the forward observation bases. I mean, he was right there in the thick of it on an operating table, and he came back with some PTSD.
And his goal was to save lives, and that didn't always happen, and that's a traumatic thing. And he's just been amazing in how he continued on with that. That's like being in combat constantly for his period of time that he was there. So it certainly was an amazing period of service that he presented to this country.
And from what I understand, Dom, he still goes out and he gives some presentations. I know he was talking to us before he left about going out and preparing remarks for something he's got coming up where he'll talk about the brain and the different parts of the human brain and how they're affected, and that there really isn't a cure. You know, you can treat things and you can help people get better, but it never, when you're talking about PTSD, it never really goes away.
Yeah, Gus Kappler is a huge advocate for veterans, and like most of us, when we come back, that's our focus. You know, for me, after I got my therapy, which I still go to, it's our focus is how can I help the next guy, the next gal that deployed, that came back home. And that's what Gus does, is he goes out there, advocates for them, and the biggest thing that he mentioned was opening your mouth. He talked about talking with a group of guys, and that's how it began to come out. So that's something I urge all of our listeners, is get out there, go to the VA, and talk to these therapists. You know, use the Compact Act. It's out there. It's free for any veteran, and go see a therapist.
Unfortunately, Vietnam veterans segregated themselves and just avoided contact even with other Vietnam veterans. And I would have made such a valuable, positive difference if we had done that and had interacted. So I urge everybody, do this. Sign up with the VA now and take advantage
That's right.
of interaction with other veterans.
Well, we thank you as always for tuning in here on Service and Sacrifice on WTEN Plus. As always, if you're on Roku, Apple TV, or Amazon Fire, go into the App Store on any one of those platforms, download the WTEN Plus app for free. You can watch us. Also gets posted to the WTEN YouTube page as well. But we'll see you right back here next week on Service and Sacrifice. Again, thanks for watching.